Bo, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the emotions of arriving at the center spotlight on an HBO show that I am very excited to see what you imprint it with now that you've been given strength and power and voice over a project. If you have not heard, Bomani Jones has his own show on HBO. You can get it. The first episode was last weekend, but you can get it HBO Max and on demand. And it's been a long journey, an exciting journey, and I'm wondering if parts of this have been overwhelming to you emotionally, if not actually being overwhelmed.
Yeah, I don't think I would use the word overwhelming. It does it has kind of jumped up in different spots that I didn't necessarily expect. And I think in some ways it's kind of pointed out to me things that I probably valued more than I recognized. So for example, when my people okie doke me and had my parents jump on the podcast and I didn't expect it. And my old man said he was proud of me and that just kind of broke me. And the thing about that is I got no question about whether or not they're proud of me, right? Like that's never, I don't want to say that's something I've taken for granted, but it's not something I've ever questioned. You know, like I'm not one of those people that is permanently seeking the approval of their parents because I never felt like I didn't have the approval of my parents. But it like took me to a place to realize like if there's a real, for me, like turning point or like a serious and important point of inflection is that when I flunked out of grad school, and it didn't change the way that any of the people who really cared about me viewed me. Like, it wasn't like they were looking at that as an evaluation or to see if what they thought was true or anything like that. And that was crucial and that was important. And that's been helpful since then because I got knocked on my ass a few more times. And so like that, like moments like those are like seeing my agent after we got done shooting and we've been in this together for over a decade, you know, that this, it's almost like, you know, that story about when Magic Johnson played his first game as a Laker and they won on the last second shot and he runs and he jumps at Kareem's arms and he's like, dude, we got 80 more of these. Chill out. I feel like that's how I feel right now sitting here on Wednesday. I treat first game felt like the Super Bowl. Now we just got to get another one done. You know, nothing major.
How often would Mac Jones give it to you verbally as a man who was proud of you but might not say it out loud?
No, but would say it out loud. Like, that's the thing. It wasn't like that was the rare time I heard that. It just landed a little different as this is kind of, I mean, like, if I'm being honest about it, it's hard for me to imagine being on camera on a TV project after this one. Like, what else am I supposed to do? Like, what else is there that I would want to do? I don't have anything else that I point to as like, yo, I just got to do this. Like, I'm viewing this in a lot of ways, not as my last chance, just the last thing I'm gonna do. Like, I got enough financial security that I'm not obligated to go chase these dollars, you know, and keep having, you know, like, you know, when you turn up and you see somebody that used to be famous on a really terrible movie that's playing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the regular TV channel, and you just know that they are over leveraged, because that's the only, like, wow, you're a Sharknado 18, huh? You must really be hurting. I ain't there. And so this for me is just like, hey, this is a lot of fun. Like, I really, really enjoy it. And I think the thing for my parents in this that I think is a big part is they can recognize that this is just something really good and enjoyable for me.
How often do you find yourself, as you have crawled through some shit, realizing and looking back on how hard it was to never compromise your principles and never allow anybody to take an inch of your dignity as you insisted in doing it your way throughout?
Yeah, you know, for me, I made a very important strategic decision early that made that not nearly as difficult. And that decision was I had no interest in going to work for a old media company or a larger company until I had established myself such that if you wanted me to work for your company, it's because you wanted me to do what I did. So like when I'm working with The Score in Canada and I'm working with SB Nation and I'm kind of building that as a social brand, I mean, maybe I was wrong, but like when I first get to ESPN and start doing that, I was doing what I was doing over there because that's what I did. That's what they were aware of, you know. So when, you know, Aaron Solomon and Tony Reali called me to do Around the Horn, and I jump on, I kicked it just like I kicked it in those other places. And so it almost kind of got grandfathered in and people had to rock with it. There's been some times working on different things just because of the limitations of whatever the particular platform was that I was on, that a lot of those things that I like to do may not have been as present as they had been previously. But to me, I think it's less about not compromising the dignity in it than I actually have this revolutionary idea about content. I really don't, I don't think people give me nearly enough credit for the fact that I seem to be maybe the one person who legitimately believes that white people are capable of enjoying content produced by an honest black person if the content is good. Right? The hardest thing that I feel like at various points in my career that I've had to fight is not about whether people think I'm talented or whether or not people think I can do this. It's their refusal to believe that white people are capable of enjoying what I do. That's the hardest thing to fight. And it's the most mind-blowing thing to me because everybody seems to think that I think every white person is racist, but they the ones that don't believe that you, white person, can enjoy what it is that I do.
Do you identify that as the hardest part of the come up? Are there other things as you were coming up that you were like, man, this is also that kind of hard? Like, why does this have to be this hard that I'm opinionated and I am good at this, objectively good at the delivering of communicated information on television, and yet it's a struggle because sometimes people cannot deal with a black man who is so self-certain that he might give off some "I'm better than you" in the interpretations that the viewer brings to it, even if you're not doing it.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing about it, right? So let's take a dude like Colin Cowherd, for example, who's brilliant at this. There are a lot of people who actively dislike him. But the reason doesn't matter, right? People who actively dislike you matter no more than people who are indifferent towards you because they're not going to listen or they're not going to watch. You see what I'm saying? The reason why doesn't nearly matter. In the grand sample, those people are the same. They're just not going to watch. But as the black person in this stuff, they care way more about the why. There's always going to be some why that people have that they decide they don't like somebody. Often they just don't like the person just because they don't. They don't have no actual explanation, but they can like easily and quickly tie it to some big thing that they see. And so with me, they might just not like me, which is fine. But then they go wind up saying something about me being black. And then all of a sudden white folks get paranoid because they fundamentally believe that their brethren are just that racist, right? So that part is the one. I'll put it like this. When I first started doing radio in Raleigh, the station did not put out a press release to announce that I had joined the station. They told me that they were going to, and I'd asked and I'd asked and I'd asked, and then finally it'd been like a month or two. But they never announced that I was hosting a show on that station. They were willing to move somebody out of his job to give me the chair. One day that dude was gone. The next day I was there. Never put out an announcement. Never told your audience that this change is permanent or anything else, right? I don't have an answer as to why it is that they did that, but I can only assume why it is that somebody would decide that they didn't want to announce a major change in their lineup. And I could tell the trepidation in the time that I was there that they just were so afraid because they were these white people calling, complaining, and they mad because the black dude's out there, but they ignoring the people that's calling. You see what I mean? They're ignoring the people who are actually showing up because they're giving so much credence to people who don't even care, who for whatever reason weren't going to consume in the first place. And if you notice that the same people keep complaining every day, that must mean that they listening every single day. And so often in so many of these places, what happens often to black people is not the idea that white people won't consume it. It's the idea that the white people who don't consume it and complain about it, their opinions are given such a disproportionate weight that you ignore what like special things can actually be happening right here before you because you're so concerned about that noise on this other side.
I always valued your voice just distilled. Just this person says things at the trough that no one else is saying. When we have so many people at the trough, how can this guy be so unique? And I thought that all the time, the only impediment that existed was, how does Bomani cross the bridge to whatever the value is of likability on television? Because of what the obstacles were, which is you're opinionated, you're of strong voice, you're proudly black, and you will not give an inch on, I'm going to do this my way. You'll work with others, you'll collaborate, but no one is going to tell you how to do this. No one's going to force that on you.
Yeah, well, I think I always felt, though, that to a degree that you were kind of falling into the same trap that I was describing, because it was a presumption about what people can and cannot like. Because, see, what I would always struggle with when you would say that is, I don't have a problem in real life with people liking me. In fact, I got a core base of people who love me that is bigger than most people who operate in this industry. Now, that's not to say that my interpretation of things was entirely correct. There were certainly ways that I was probably coming across to people that I did not realize. And I guess part of my life has been understanding that sometimes you can only do but so much. And sometimes people just ain't gonna like you, and you just got to live with that. So for me, it is difficult when I hear somebody say that you should do something to be more likable, because I feel like in large measure, likability is beyond my control. But at the same time, the thing that you would always say is just about the idea of softening me just a little bit, which was correct, because I didn't realize that people, regardless of whether or not I think they should receive me in whatever way it is, once you realize that some people do, you just got to deal with it from there. So we had a day where doing that radio show out there in Miami Gardens, and Mike Ryan said something to me comparing me to Skip Bayless. And I told him if he was going to do that again, I was going to come on the other side of that glass. And holy shit, he thought I meant it. Now, it doesn't matter if I found that to be preposterous. If he thought I meant it, I kind of sort of got to keep that in mind, right? Like once you make money off of who you are, it's almost like all these strangers become like your friend. Like, okay, you can keep arguing about how right you are if you want to, but that ain't gonna make this no more peaceful. This ain't gonna make this life necessarily no more easy. So there was some parts that I wasn't willing to go on, but in fact, I'll tell you, this is actually a bit of a formative story of my youth. So I did like a summer program before my freshman year of college with the people that were there on my scholarship program with me. And as I've told people, I didn't have a lot of experience when I was younger hanging out with people my age, because I got older parents, and I'd like hang out on the college campus after school. And we did the summer program. We come back for freshman year. Little did I know, or I quickly came to realize, apparently I was so obnoxious that everybody disliked me. But like in that I want to like you, but you just make it impossible because you're so obnoxious sort of way. And I mean, you can imagine how heartbreaking that is to you when you're 16, 17 years old. And I remember I went to my parents' house because I was real sad about it. Because, you know, at that age, I'm thinking literally nobody likes me in the world. And I did like a real self-assessment on it. And I was like, well, one thing I had to realize, and I realized very quickly, is that what I do and who I am are not the same thing. And these people are telling me that they don't like what I'm doing. And I can do some measure of correction on that. And then, of course, as I did the measure of correction, some of them still just didn't like me. You know what I mean? Like that was just what it was going to be. Unfortunately, one of those people was my roommate. That can be a little bit awkward. But that, you know, so I guess my point being, I recognize that you can't get so caught up in, well, this is just who I am. But you also can't pander to people, because the pandering is probably not going to work. But you can recognize when you're doing something that you don't have to do and that you're not wedded to, but it's like if you are communicating and people are receiving it in a way that you do not intend, if you communicate professionally, then you have to change the way that you communicate.
Have you done any self-assessment on where your dignity or your self-respect comes from? Like what shaped it to be the monster core that you simply, and I admire it so much about you. I really do. I don't think of it as stubborn. I think of it as sort of a hardened strength, that you just, you will not allow one shred of your dignity to be compromised. Your chest will come out. Do you know where that comes from?
I don't know. I think it's part of it. There's a certain, like, that's all I got level to it. But I also think another part of it for me is, for better or worse, and not because I requested it. Like, if we're just being honest, if I were another person talking about me as the person that I am, it means something different to people when I say something, right? Like, the weight of my opinion with people around me has always been kind of noticeable. Like, it matters. And that comes with a certain measure of responsibility to it. You know, you have to, I don't think I take myself nearly as seriously as a lot of people believe that I do. But I also recognize that there's a certain seriousness about who I am, and in a lot of ways what I represent. And you're just not going to try to play me, right? You can joke with me, we can go back and forth, but you're just not going to try to play me. Like, that's the part that for me, I think comes up, because I think there's no worse feeling in the world than thinking that people respect you and finding out that they don't. And that's something, especially like as a Black person that's got to traffic in what I would call somewhat ascendant white spaces, is a thing that can happen to you a lot. And you look up and you realize, and to be honest, to be fair, that ain't happened to me no whole lot, right? Like, I'm a person that commands respect from people, even people who don't want to give it to me. That's just what it's been. But that feeling when you realize somebody was trying to play you, or they looked at it the other way, I ain't really here for that.
It's funny it's funny that you said that, though, because the worst that you and I ever had in the way of an argument, and the last time we talked on air about this, you said the first time and the only time that I was my emotional self outside of a Black space with you, Dan, it almost ended our relationship. And what you just articulated there about a lack of respect and how much it hurts is, I remember right after that argument that we had, we'll get into the details as much as you care to or don't care to, but right after that argument we had, and it was the only bad one I think that we ever had, I remember sitting with you outside and asking you some form of, it doesn't seem like you like me very much. It doesn't seem like you respect me very much. And your answer, and I was hurt by it, was that, well, sometimes in your head, people, you form an idea of a person that is so high that they can't actually meet it. And I ended up getting the kind of hurt that you're talking about there. I remember that one hurting me, because I thought, oh my God, he doesn't like me as much as I wished that he would.
Yeah, I think I intended that as the opposite, which is kind of like, I've seen Wyatt Cenac talk about that with Jon Stewart, that you can place responsibility on somebody that they didn't ask for and put them in a position that's unfair to them almost, because they will ultimately wind up disappointing because you've created something outsized that they never had a chance to get. Like, I actually meant that more in measure of like apology than the idea of you have let me down, right? Like, it was like I did too much in the first place. And so what had happened there, I guess I'll leave the dude's name out so it don't turn no controversy, but there's this dude who worked with us, who, for whatever reason, like, took umbrage with me about something on television once and carried it over. And he thought that on the radio that Stugotz was me. And so, you know, Dan and Stugotz are doing that thing where they telling a joke amongst themselves like other people ain't around and expect other people to know what's going on. And Stugotz asked Stugotz something, and Stugotz's response was angry. And the guy on the phone says, oh, wow, Bomani, what a surprise. You're angry. That only happens in days that end in Y. And then it was the clarification that it wasn't Bomani, and then it was just chuckles. And I was like, yo, this dude really tried to play me according to a racist trope. Like, it's right there. And so I said something to you about it, and you told me that there must have been a reason that he thought that. And I walked out, and I didn't say anything for probably a week and a half, which was a terrible idea, because I was so furious. And by the time I did say something, I walked into the room and was so mad that I was crying and explaining, like, not even explaining, it was like, don't do that again. And the trigger for Dan LeBatard is telling him to or not to do something. So we are in a space that neither of us has seen the other in. And the thing for me that was like, what hurt about that for me was, it felt like I was hearing my white friends laugh at a racist joke, except the racist joke was not just generally racist, but it was actually about me. And then in trying to say like, hey man, I was kind of messed up, it was like, well, there must be some reason that this person feels that way, which then put me in this place of feeling like I was kind of blamed for it. But see, interactions like those for me are part of why it's hard for me to like take it but so seriously when people outside have things to say about me, because it all, like, there's so much trash that comes up in the way that it's hard for me to tell. Like, it's actually interesting. I don't remember if I told you this, and I probably didn't because you were busy. It was your wedding. But I remember that when we first started doing that show, you had your friends who thought I was going to ruin your career and everything else, because, you know, you would probably be all that I was going to be the worst thing to happen, even though, keep it real, best thing to happen, actually. Anyway, guy came up to me at your wedding and told me, I told Dan that he was making a terrible mistake when you first started working with him. I couldn't understand it. I thought that this was going to ruin his career, and I was wrong. And it's very nice to be able to meet you, you know? And so I operate largely on this premise with a lot of these people. Just give them a second to get used to this. This is not the same as what they are accustomed to. I fully understand that. But the moment's going to come where they realize I am more similar to them than almost anybody that they're going to find on the air. It's just going to take them a little while to see it. And once they do, they're going to ride with me forever.
I did not realize even now, because we talked about it at the time, but what I remember about that back and forth, all I remember about the back and forth is, how could you expect me to expect any guest of ours to confuse Stugotz and Bomani and do anything other than laugh nervously because I had no pivot on the totally unexpected thing that had arrived is, how do you confuse Stugotz and Bomani? Like, I was not prepared to pivot, so all it got was angry Bomani and awkward laughter because I was not quick enough to react to something that was wholly unexpected of me. But that portion of it, of course, that would be hurtful to you. If somewhere within that or within the argument, what you're hearing is that you made that person dislike you, like, because that's not anywhere in my thought process. So I don't know how it is that in the anger of that, that's what got conveyed.
Yeah, but it got conveyed in part because you believe that I could do these things to make people like me more. And so if there's a person who feels this way and you believe that I already, like off the top, and or more accurately in what I'm saying here, I know that you believe that part of the reason that people respond as such is because of what I give them. And to me, like, y'all didn't realize, y'all are so delightfully white sometimes, like you didn't realize the idea of calling me angry had racial undertones to it, which, wow, man, I wish I lived a life like that. But anyway, that part for me, I thought was obvious. And so that's, you know, so that's where I go, but that's part, but you know, to the point about dignity and having to stand, I got cats like that at every turn who just all of a sudden decide that and I've gotten better. Like, what's happened now is I've gotten to the point now in my career where I'm not the most famous person in the world, but I'm somebody here, right? Like, we're not far removed from people being asked, who influenced you in your career, young hotshot writer? And my name's gonna come up in some of those places. Like, I've made myself into a somebody in this. And so that means that nobodies don't have to be acknowledged no more. Like, I used to jump on and clown the nobodies for my own entertainment, but I'm not out here making stars. And I realized that when somebody who had been very good to me for a long portion of my career decided that he was going to try to take shots at me for profit. And once he did that, I looked up and I realized that what had happened was I had reached a place where I'm going to be the one to make him famous and just let it go because I couldn't win. And that's just kind of where it is now with a lot of these people. Like, I ain't worried about, but so many people that got bad things to say about this TV show, because I see all the people that got good things to say about it. We so far beyond haters at this point, at least beyond the point where we got to do something with them.
Well, let me ask you this, as there is a lane now for professional asshole who just basically profits off of whatever Bomani Jones has circling around him. I saw immediately after the debut of your show, in a way that was unfair and dishonest, okay? The predictable shit-stained people that go, here were the ratings from the first night, and it is using such a faulty measurement system on 11:30 on a Sunday night at daylight savings time, just clicking in the on-demand age and using ratings numbers that would be from like 1992 to show the show is failing. It comes after John Oliver, and it merely has hundreds of thousands of listeners instead of what John Oliver has, not accounting for the demand, not accounting for the ability to watch it over the course of a week, not accounting for the fact that HBO doesn't care about the initial night of ratings, because that's not the way anyone does the ratings anymore. They used you as a point to point out, here it is, this black guy who's being held up by the establishment. This is failure. Being politicized like that and having to stay quiet because you only bring attention to it, that's learned. But is it not hard to not respond?
It's easier than it used to be. It's not hard when you realize these people don't really have nearly as big of an audience as folks think. That's the biggest issue. It's easier to disregard it when you see the people in your mentions who are sent by those folks, and then you check their profiles, and it's a lot of fiction. You know what I mean? Like that, like we've overestimated how many of these people exist. People are allowed not to like what I do. They are on the list of people who do not like what I do. They ascribe it to these larger things because of what it is that they think that I represent. These aren't people. There's like this, every now and then I want to buck at them just because I can clown them, right? Like that's the part that's hard. It's not even like I must defend myself as much as, wow, I could really embarrass this person right now. But, you know, they really don't matter. Like with this show for me in particular, I never, like people have asked me what's the metric for success of this show. I don't know. You have to ask HBO. I've not inquired about that. I didn't ask anybody how many people watch the show. I didn't ask for any numbers. I wasn't curious about any of that stuff. I'm so locked in to how much fun we're having making this show. And my only thought is we got 6 episodes of television to make that hopefully we could be proud of. The people who work here, even if we only get 6, can parlay into something else. And people be like, oh yeah, I like that. I was on it, or whatever it is. So these folks over here, I'm just amazed at how much they care about me. Like, I always wonder if they realize that they are affirming what a bad motherfucker I am every time they do something like that. Because I'm not going back and forth with them. I'm not duking it out with them. I make a lot of people really mad simply by existing. Like, I wish they would stop lying. That's the only problem I have, is when they say things with no verification that I think are obviously false. But beyond that, man, I can't imagine spending nearly as much time thinking about somebody as they think about me without ever having the chance to get that person naked.
There's some real learning in that, though, Bo, and some real confidence in it, because I remember the conversations we had where I didn't think that the Twitter back and forth, never mind that some of them are not real and they're bots, and now we're at a point where there are trolls just looking to incite you. But I thought that your brain is so big and needs so much activity, needs so much fuel. I thought your relationship with Twitter was something that would be unhealthy for you, and told you so, because it seemed like this attitude that you're speaking to now has been strengthened over time, when you had to build your own brand because people were working against you. And that Twitter space was you grabbing social media and being like, look, I can do my own thing here and have my own audience and not have to share it with anybody and have my celebrators. But I thought it was poisonous what was around you. Like, just because I thought it was an enduring beating that your mental health was taking, because so many people were so hateful in a space where you were spending a lot of time.
Yeah, and I still, to this day, they didn't affect the way that I viewed myself, and I really was squashing bugs for sport. Like, I think that's the hard. Like, Katie Nolan said that she thought I was so mad all the time until she actually met me, and she was like, oh, this doesn't bother him a single bit. And that was true, and that was the hardest thing for people to recognize, is that when I was kicking it like that, I was really just putting on a show. I was the comedian who made a significant part of his act destroying hecklers. Like that was, that was truly what it was for me. And I just do it, and then I keep going. Like I still got people who stop me on the street and ask if I can unblock them and all of this because they were just mad that one day they didn't mean to cross me or whatever it happened to be. But what happened really for me was a gradual process starting with the 2016 election. And so with 2016, I had decided I would talk about the things on Twitter peripherally associated with politics, but not really politics. It just wasn't worth it. And I had all the jokes about the Republican primary, and then they actually nominated Trump. And so they actually nominated Trump. It made me fall back on a lot of stuff. Most notably, I felt like when I was operating with my best intentions, that I was pulling people's coat to things that they simply did not realize or things that they had not considered, and that I was in a position to kind of help. I don't want to say mold thought, but I was influencing a conversation, right? A fairly nuanced conversation that went a bunch of different directions, but that's what I felt like I was doing. When they nominated Trump, I was like, okay, you don't need me to explain anything to you. Either you're going to do this or you not. It's your call, whichever direction you choose to go in. But it ain't going to be because you didn't know what was in front of you. It wasn't going to be because you needed to use some different context because there have been so many layers of code that have been thrown on top of the rhetoric for so long. No, you just decided that was what you were going to do. I was useless. In terms of talking about the larger world, there was no use for me, really, from 2016 almost until now, right? Everything is so obvious. Everything is almost so stark. The biggest problem I have now with the public discourse is that there is no intra-group criticism anymore because everybody's clicked up. Everybody got to be in a fight against the entire other side. And the reason is because now each side can look inside the living room of the other side. And so what is healthy back and forth between groups is now a sign of weakness to what is in effect your enemy, right? That's where the biggest issue comes. My greatest frustration is that there's not a lot of room to criticize. There's not a lot of room for black people to criticize black people in the public space anymore. It's not a lot of room for people on the left to criticize people on the left. You don't see a lot of criticism of within the right unless it's a question about whether or not you going hard enough for the cause. But you don't see just a disagreement on some issue within the sides. And so I looked up and I was just like, so why? And so I just kind of backed out of a lot of conversations. And I had another day where I looked up in my mentions and I saw a bot show up. And then I saw another bot show up to argue with the first bot. And I just realized I have no idea anymore if I'm actually talking to a human being. And what I did enjoy about Twitter, even if I was squashing bugs, was they were still people. It was still human interaction. And in particular, in a time of my life where I was probably overinvested in my work. And so that human interaction allowed me to keep grinding while also still kind of sort of dealing with people. But now at this point, the way I feel now about those haters, I've always ignored those people. I was people oh, you'll squash somebody with 35 followers. Yeah, because they're not trying to make a name for themselves. All I'm doing for them is embarrassing them and destroying them. What I wasn't going to do was get out here and elevate anybody that I knew was picking on me for profit. And as soon as I got a whiff of that, it was like, nah, you can have it.
And you also wouldn't have black on black interactions. That was principled. You didn't want beef. You didn't want black people fighting for sport in front of white people.
No, I think it very rarely, I wound up in a big one with Talib Kweli that lives on in infamy. I wound up in one with Chris Broussard. And I like Chris a lot, but he got onto a cause that's very important to me, which is, well, basically what happened was it was when Russell Wilson was saying that he and Sierra had stopped having sex, and I just didn't understand why I was supposed to give anybody credit for that. Maybe I'm not supposed to give you credit for who you are having sex with, but I'm not giving you credit for who you not having sex with, especially if it's Sierra. I'm not impressed by that. I find that to be preposterous. And, it was wrapped up in all the Jesus and the sanctity of chastity and all of that stuff or whatever. And I find that to be preposterous. And so Broussard had come on and told me at one point that I owe an apology to him and everyone who followed his Lord. And I was like, nah, that ain't really going to happen. And it's for two reasons. One, all that stuff's about controlling women because the rules are much more strongly on women, than men when it comes to that, at least in the ways that they're enforced. And number two, I'm just not out here talking anybody who might want to have sex with me out of it. And I don't want you to do that either. You know what I'm saying? out here being like, yo, you shouldn't do that. You need to mind your own business. Okay? If that woman wants to sleep with me, the last thing I need to hear is, man, she heard Chris Broussard talk about it the other day and it changed the whole mind. Hell no. I was willing to fight a black dude and argue with a black dude in public over that one. You were absolutely right.
You mentioned Trump, and you have taught me a lot about race. You, like love tends to do, will show you some of your blind spots, and among them, I remember you asking me and not understanding it. I don't know whether it's privilege or naivete, but I'm like, what's the matter with putting Geraldo Rivera and Donald Trump on our show? It doesn't mean anything. It's just silly entertainers who are coming on and making loud noises. And on both of them, you were like, why are you supporting that? And I didn't know the damage. I underestimated that the clown show could be something that would accrue power. And then even you didn't think there was a path. You did not think
this would happen. I didn't think this would happen. I didn't think it happened while it was happening. I didn't think it would happen until it happened. I was so comfortable on election night 2016 that I took a nap. I woke up and was like, what do you mean he's still ahead? I couldn't believe it. I did not. When he got nominated, that's where I was like, whoa, we got to take a step back. Like, in fact, I remember because I had gone to Paris that year to interview Coates for Playboy, and I didn't have to mention that I went to Paris to do it, but flex. So anyway, I went to Paris to interview Coates for Playboy, and this was in like April. And I asked him about, like, you talk about Trump. He was like, no, I just don't think it's something to take seriously. That's not Hazy Coates, right? That is not an optimist. That is not a man who believes in the virtue of white people. And none of us thought that this would actually happen.
It's not just that it's Ta-Nehisi Coates. I just want the audience to enjoy the escalation of not merely did Dan underestimate the problem that racism was in this country, not merely did Bomani underestimate the problem that racism was in this country, but Ta-Nehisi Coates underestimated how you could. I remember one of my closest friends saying to me early on, Dan, there's a path. There is a path for Donald Trump, and he was black, and he is black, and I'm like, there's no path. What are you talking about? It
never dawned on me that this could happen. Because I'll tell you what Dad said. My dad was like, I'm not surprised that they elected a racist. He was like, I just didn't think they'd elect a fool. Like, that was his outlook on it. Like, I just didn't think that. I thought they would take that dude down from the inside. Because, look, it was fun at first. When he stepped up at that one debate, it was like, Bobby Jindal is polling at 1%. I don't even know why he's here. Oh, my God, I was dying. Because there was an element of entertainment there that if you are not a Republican, then he was just picking off left and right all the people that you've had jokes on forever. And it was like, okay, cool, this will be fun while it lasts. But you thought somebody was going to stop. No, they did not.
I love the idea of you and Mac Jones and Ta-Nehisi Coates would have respected it more if he was better at concealing the racism. If he was...
No. Not if he was better at concealing the racism. If he was better at stuff.
The conversation that we were having about likability earlier and how it is that you cross the divide, the bridge of being authentically yourself, being a unique voice, but also being someone who appeals to the masses. I don't mean to compare you to the other black broadcaster because he's the black guy at the top of the game. I'm comparing you to Stephen A. Smith because he's just at the top of the game. He is considered the very best at this, and I don't believe him to be better than you at this, not in substance. And it's no insult to Stephen A. I just don't think that he's better at the substance of talking about some of the stuff we talk about and the intersections of sports. But I do believe that however it is he does it, allows him more access to more people. And I don't know if it's likability, but I don't think that he's better than you at this. And so what am I missing when I think, well, Bomani Jones should be at the top of this pyramid? Bomani Jones is the best that I have ever seen at being able to talk about all of this stuff. Historically, never going to sound dumb, going to be excellent at television. And yet, for whatever the reasons are, Stephen A. Smith is a bigger star. Why?
Yeah. I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but I think there's a better a better way to look at this. I could never host First Take as well as Stephen A. Smith does. Never could. I don't think Stephen A. Smith could host Game Theory as well as I can host that show. And so for that format, which is a very relatable format, like the thing I don't think that people give, people are like, oh, I hate debate television, and all that stuff. Like there's a lot of also, especially in sports, there's kind of a racial undertone element to it because First Take is, it has been seen as the black show. The audience is very black. It's the rap music bumpers, and all of that stuff. And so like, even with Skip being on there, I feel like he got, caught up in a lot of some residual resentment that people had to what the very idea of that show was. But Stephen A. is like a really thoughtful dude. Like, I think he really gives a lot of consideration to topics in ways that people don't consider. And he is not simply a gifted presenter, but he's given a lot more thought to how he presents on television than I ever have. I'm a bit of a neutral and then just kind of pick up some things along the way. Like Stephen A. is studying those ratings after shows and everything else. And so he is optimized for performing on the platforms at which he performs. So you might think that I am smarter than him or something like that and all of that. But when you put it all together, he's Stephen A. Smith. Or maybe another way that I put it, I talk about this with Bob Marley and Peter Tosh. Like Peter Tosh taught Bob Marley how to play guitar. He's a better guitar player than Bob. He's a better singer than Bob, or has a better voice, at least, like by traditional standards. I could even argue that his band was better than Bob's. Just one small problem. He ain't Bob Marley. It just can't be explained necessarily. And Stephen A. Smith, I'm not that dude. Like, he is who he is. And when he talks and he says this stuff, it gets people's attention. And also, this is also worth noting, I think important. He has journalistic credibility that I do not. He has a resume and he has some stripes that I have not earned. And so you put all that together and you create it. He's so good at this. Like, that's the one. Like, I don't ever get bothered by anything involving Stephen A. Smith and not being the same as me. It's kind of like worked at Page 2 and there were rules for Bill Simmons and then rules for the rest of us. Like, oh, okay, he's that dude. Got it. And I came to understand why it was that he was that dude. And I could say maybe I do this thing better than that person, but in sum total, sometimes the market does speak.
So you don't agree with my assessment that you're better than Stephen A. Smith at the...
Well, it depends on what we're talking about doing. This is what I think about me with regards to television like that. I don't know if there's anybody who can do as many things as well I can do in sports television. That I don't know. But for that thing that he does, he is so much better at it than everybody else that becomes the only thing that matters. But there ain't a whole lot of shows on ESPN. Like, I feel like if you gave me a couple of months and said, hey, we want to get you doing some analysis on like NFL Live, I'd have to work really hard for those 2 months to like be able to present in that way. But you give me some time, I can learn to do it, and I could probably get pretty good at it. Like, I look at all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, yeah, if you wanted me to be a Sports Center anchor, if you gave me some time to work at it and improve at it, I could probably be good at doing that. Like, I don't know how many people. I said I don't think that there's anybody that can do more. That's not fair, but I'm not sure there is people that could do more. But it's like when you get that's like the best all-around player in the NBA. They don't necessarily mean you the best player in the NBA. Sometimes don't nothing matter more than filling it up. And that dude can fill it up.
You can fill it up as well. Give some people before you get out of here, and I urge you to check out Bomani Jones's podcast. And also, you've got The Right Time with Bomani Jones, but The Evening Jones is still out there outside of sports, and his HBO show, new HBO show you can get that streaming at any time, HBO and HBO Max. But give the people before you get out of here some insight or some intimacy that they might not know about all the time we spent together with Boppy and our relationship, and what you think, some observations that might surprise the audience about your time teaching us about everything that we were taught while you were down here in our lives.
Yeah, one thing I don't think that people quite grasp is Eric created a television show that allowed us to do well when we actually didn't have very much chemistry. Like, people are always like, yo, the chemistry between you guys is so great. Not really, right? Like, you gotta realize, I got to Miami on May 11th. We did our first show on May 13th, and that show don't never have you looking at each other. So Dan would do that show and then jump in the car and go do a radio show, you know, and everything else and how it goes. And so Dan decides he's going to be your friend. He's going to be your friend right away, all on top of you, sweating and smothering you. I operate in the complete opposite space. It was a bit of an evolution in figuring out how to bring that together. And this is the part that I always think is interesting. And I hope you understand that I'm not saying this with judgment. Dan is a very, very, very selfless person who just has had absolutely no idea that the sun has been revolving around his big ass for like 20 years. He just doesn't quite grasp it because he's such a nice man.
But 40 years, right? Because I have been the center of longer than that. Like, I've been the center of things for a while. And yes, I have some blind spots about that.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying, but you're a wonderfully nice man. And so wonderfully nice people often just can't quite realize when those things happen. And so what I think was difficult for Dan to get was that as giving, when I say giving, not many people take their names off the mark of a television show just because they added some post that hardly anybody had heard of, you know what I mean? The man was giving and generous, but it's almost like when Steph Curry went to the Warriors. I mean, Kevin Durant went to the Warriors. Steph Curry, nicest guy in the world. But then there's some moments where you're like, yo, I used to take that shot. Like, how am I supposed to do that? And so I'm trying to figure out how to work with another for the first time. And I think for Dan, who very much so puts a lot of stock in his belief, his goodness as a human being. Like, I am a good dude. Dan do something wrong. Dan is hitting you with the, I'm just out here trying to be a good person. I'm just trying to be nice. You know, Dan's that dude, right? And so figuring that out was more of a process than I think people would realize. But I think the other part that would probably surprise people, maybe more on my end than on Dan's, is an actual real live concern and dedication to figuring that out and getting it right. Like, that was, I think that's one of the rare relationships in my life where there really wasn't an option of like, all right, we just pull the plug on this. No, I got a 4-year contract. I'll pick my life up and move down here. We gonna do this. And we did. Like, we really legitimately did. And I didn't fully appreciate, I think, how much I appreciated kind of the human elements of all of that until it started like coming down toward the end of it. Like, I was always incredibly grateful for the way that you handled it and the space, even where it was difficult, the space that you were willing to give me to work in and around what it was that you had done and that you had built. Like, all of that was like really, really big to me and really important. But no, we were just consummate professionals. So any problem, nobody was ever going to be able to see or detect. And the problems were never big. It was never problems. It's just that they want love. And we was like, love was building. It was growing. It was kind of going. Like, honestly, the thing for me that I look back on, and this is the part I think that people, like something intimate that I don't think that people would quite think of, and where I like to think that I was helpful towards you in a way, is that you are older than me, but my parents are older than yours. So my father, at least, is older than your parents. So as your father is getting older, I had already gone through that. And so, not through it, but you know what I mean? But I could give you some advice and pointers about how to deal with your old man when your old man's getting a little bit older, and how you got to say things to your old man so he feels like it's his own idea and all of that stuff. And knowing like the difficulties of fathers and sons, no matter what. And so I was able to be the person that could tell your dad something that you could tell him just because you're his son. Like, it's not fair, but them's the rules.
No, you had a very special and cool relationship with my father. And I remember thinking to myself, Bo, like when I read about Wyatt Cenac's stuff with Jon Stewart, I remember thinking to myself, oh, I wonder if Bomani feels that way here because he's entered somebody else's orbit, and if he feels like Wyatt Cenac at The Daily Show because the concessions, you're moving to Miami, the concessions have to be yours, and you're not someone who concedes easily. And it's not helping that I'm sort of oblivious to the idea that there are any concessions required at all.
Oh, yeah. In fact, before Wyatt told the world, I learned about it in a conversation with him because I was complaining about you. Funny how the world works that way, isn't it?
I am happy. Well, you taught us a lot down here, and you continue to teach us. So you should watch this show with Bomani Jones because it'll be a smart show, obviously. But it's the show that's going to have his imprint on it more than any other show in his distinguished career. So, Bo, I am thrilled for you. Thank you for spending this time with us, buddy.
I appreciate it. And by the way, it's a good show. Like, and you guys know me as much as you guys might think about myself. It's a good show. I legitimately believe it's a good show. And check it out. If you disagree, that's cool. But like, I'm saying with a confidence that I've never said about anything that I've released into the space. This is good.
And what I'm telling you, if you're doing it, Bo, that goes without saying. You can say it. You can say it, but it's got it's your thing with your imprint. You're the one making sure that your needs are met without apology and with all of the lessons you have learned to make a show at this point in your career.
But I will tell you this. The last show I did, I said going in, I didn't think it was possible to have a brick with me on it. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a brick, but it wasn't a swish. You know what I mean? So I've been humbled to the point of realizing that, hey, maybe this thing might not work. However, that ain't the question about this one. This, like I say, I don't know what episode 2 gonna be. I'm gonna do my best, but go check out episode 1. That thing bang.
You should check out episode 1, and you should enjoy it on HBO. I do remember, Bo, and I know you got to get out of here because we've gone long, but I do remember you came in through the door, and there was something that you knew or felt that you knew that you said we were not going to be friends. It's not the nature of television relationships. You were pessimistic about the idea that we could genuinely be friends because of TV egos, the stuff that happens. And so I am more than proud to call you a friend because we survived all of that.
And I apologize for being so cynical.
I'm apologizing for, I'm apologizing for not being ready for the idea that someone would confuse Stugotz and Bomani and like for not being as quick as you are at being able to identify when people get to the racism, because how do they confuse you and Stugotz, Bo? Like, it's impossible. It's impossible.
That guy. See
you later, Bo.
All right,